Hello, listeners. Welcome to Energy Thinks, a podcast about the oil and gas industry's role in the energy future. I'm Tisha Schuller, your host and the CEO of Adamantine Energy. I have released my new book, The Myth and the Moment, From Polarization to Progress in the New Energy Landscape. And so I have been talking to people and exploring the themes of that book. And so in today's episode, I'm going to, of course, give you a little bit of a personal update. But really what I'm going to focus on is some of the thinking I'm doing around this Problem Solvers series. In particular, what comes after the moment. So there's the myth, there's the moment, and what comes after. And why does that matter? And what kind of proof or vision is required to make sure that we don't go back to a world dominated by the myth of an easy energy transition? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I hope that you will go to energythinks.com to learn more about our work at Adamantine. And while you're there, please subscribe to my weekly newsletter. Both of these things are true, available on Substack and LinkedIn. I've added, at your request, a paid option on Substack. So those of you who want to support my work but are not a client of Adamantine, you can do so. And thanks so much for your interest and enthusiasm. It's really nice to have resources to do more writing and podcasting and thinking. I hope you enjoy today's solo podcast. Well, everyone, I'm recording this right before I go to Egypt, and you'll be listening to it when I get back from Egypt. So you'll have to wait one more solo podcast episode to hear how that went. But I'm going to Egypt for a swim trek, and I have been swimming a lot, but not enough. When I was in Taos with my husband for a wonderful birthday celebration of a leader in the center-left environmental energy movement, I did go to a master swim in Taos. So I'm making a real effort, but there's just not enough hours in the days to swim as much as one can. So I'm excited to let you know how that goes. And I'll be actually completely off the grid for like a week on a boat. So that's going to be unprecedentedly good for me. And the other personal update is my oldest got a summer internship in the industry, which it's weird. Those of you who have job-age children may have had this experience. When your kid gets a job, you feel like you got a job, like you feel that proud and accomplished. And there's also a little bit of like him following in my footsteps, or at least listening to me or something. I'm just really excited that his engineering physics degree is going to be in service to just what I think is the most exciting time in my lifetime to be working in energy. Okay, so today what I want to talk about is some of the thinking I have around what comes next after the myth and the moment. So let me set the stage a little bit. So we have the myth of an easy energy transition, which dominated for the last decade. That myth is starting to unravel as pressures have made it clear that the energy transition will be neither easy, nor quick, nor inevitable. And that has led us to the moment. And the moment is this wonderful space, as Kevin Krauser described on the podcast that you heard last. There's this pause where we can all take advantage of the space to have sensible conversations about the energy future. And I think then there's this really interesting question that I'm going to spend the next 6 months or so thinking about, which is what comes next and how much does it need to be defined, either through a vision or articulated, maybe even through like a policy prescription or at least a framework for a policy description? And is this really important in order to shape what comes next? Or should we just be content with what feels like a total free-for-all happening right now, right? Every state, every company, every utility just having a real competition of both ideas and projects to see what gets built. But there's an absence of a coherent plan, it feels like, for all of this. So I think the reason I'm thinking about this is because I'm writing a 4-part series on the problem solvers. And I'll give you a quick overview of that because it kind of sets the stage of why I've gotten to be thinking about this. So the first part is just really saying, like, who is a problem solver and what does the world look like according to them? And so a problem solver is any person caught between climate ambition and climate commitments and what's actually happening on the ground. So they have a bunch of stakeholders that are essentially saying, you need to get us to 100% renewables or 24 hours, 7 days a week, net zero power. But the reality on the ground is there's a real competition to build power gen resources. There's real constraints, both on moving molecules to get to those resources and pipelines and moving electrons through the transmission grid. And then an energy consumer world where people are getting concerned about reliability and affordability, all while we have cost of living as the top political issue for most voters. So in that world, the problem solvers are squeezed between these things. So my series first talks about what does the world look like according to them? Who are their stakeholders? What do they require? And then I'm going to go through the emotional reckoning that's required of them. Like if you are a myth adherent, if you believed that the energy transition was imminent, it's a really hard process to let that go. So that's part 2, which will be out by the time you listen to this. And then what you're going to hear in the next couple parts of the series I'm working on is what is the courage required of these problem solvers to be able to articulate to their stakeholders that reality on the ground is a lot harder than the ambition of climate. And so how do they do that? What are some tools they can use? And then the last will be what's the social and political cover that these problem solvers need from the business community, from consumers, in order to start having energy policy that will balance all these priorities. So as I'm working on, you can sort of see the arc of that series for the problem solvers. It has really begged an interesting question for me, which is, do we need to at least say what comes after the moment? There was the myth. Now there's the moment, which is a bit of a high intensity, high stakes energy system free-for-all. Do we need to imagine what comes next? Do we need to have a vision for it? And do we need to have a framework for it? So here's a few things I'm thinking about. I personally believe that we're about to have a ton of unabated natural gas power generation built. We're going to need a lot of pipelines and power gen and probably storage to support that build out. And it would be really good if there were some public good components of that build out. For example, it would be amazing if we had best in class natural gas production, transportation, emissions. And by best in class, I mean all the things, but emissions reductions such that carbon intensity is really low, small footprint, community partnership. These would all be things that would make the build out of a bunch of gas much more positive and a long-term narrative about the industry and the future of the industry. So I would love to see a world right now where there's a lot of emphasis on best in class, whether that's differentiated gas, certified gas, low carbon emissions intensity gas. But the idea that the world is going to give us a pass on the environmental and emissions footprint, I think is short-sighted at best and deeply foolish and will backfire at worst. So I do think there's going to be a lot of natural gas. I think this is something that we could celebrate for many reasons: energy security, relatively low environmental footprint, ability to deliver best in class. Some of our big companies have wonderful community engagement programs and stewardship programs, community benefits plans. So there's a real opportunity to do this well and do this right. And I would like to see a deep emphasis on that. The other thing I think would be interesting is to have more leadership around what's going to be the power solutions for communities and regions. So right now it feels like there's sort of just a frenzy to build out data centers. But in all this building, what is the opportunity for tech innovation, for iterative improvements on those iterations? So for example, if you have a natural gas plus CCS plant operation going in, what is the opportunity to share best-in-class technology learnings so that every project that comes after is done better, is done more cost effectively, has learned from the opportunities, experiences, and mistakes of the projects that have gone before it? So what's the opportunity for some stewardship, civic leadership, understanding that this energy frenzy could be really good for regions, could be really good for communities? More power, better power, innovative power, cheaper power. So I'd like to see some emphasis on the opportunity to craft win-win solutions. So how would one do this? I'm not really sure. As you can tell, I'm really in the raw, brainstormy, arm-wavy thinking portion of this. But I could imagine that you come up with, if you're an oil and gas company, for example, or even a tech company, let's say, who wants to build a bunch of data centers, you could come up with a formulation that says we're going to need a bunch of natural gas, but we're going to pair it with a commitment to iterative, ever-improving innovation. Whether that innovation is empowered by policy, carrot incentive policy, that would be perhaps a winning formulation that both Republicans and Democrats could get behind. We still are going to need a coherent relationship with regulation, right? We're going to need a floor. So if innovation is maybe the ceiling or the carrot component of a functioning energy system, there's still always going to be a requirement for the floor, because as we've seen in any build out, whether it's early oil and gas wildcatting or early wind wildcatting, whenever there's a frenzy, there's going to be bad actors, and they reflect poorly on everyone. So it's in our collective interest as energy industry proponents and civic leaders to ensure that there's guardrails that don't turn the whole community, the public, against the endeavor. So I think there is going to have to be some formulation that's energy source. In this case, let's just say natural gas. We need generation, we need pipelines, and we're going to need associated other innovations like CCS or hydrogen or lower carbon intensity innovations along the way. So some kind of policy financing frameworks that support that. And then we're going to need a real commitment to regulation that creates the minimum standard to ensure that either just like inexperienced startups or sloppy private equity backed companies that just want to build and sell, that these don't undermine the endeavor. So I guess I'm mixing up two ideas here, but I do think we need to start really thinking about each of us who are building the system, the energy system, whatever our little part of the elephant that the blind man is touching, that we start thinking about how it could fit in to a positive civic leadership landscape where we are creating an energy system of the future for the future, including a broader community set than just the companies involved. And then I think we need to think about a framework, an energy development framework that pairs the absolute need for development with innovation incentives and expectations and regulatory constraints. So that's my thinking. Now, I think I said why this matters, but there's a couple things. I've been thinking a lot about what is it going to take for Democrats writ large or liberals writ large to be able to support building of infrastructure. And I think that it's going to take a vision of this kind of building that is making a community or a region better. The one-off idea is like when you build, this is why we have zoning. The idea that we're going to build the best system with no coherent planning is silly. In fact, in Colorado, in oil and gas development, one of the great innovations of the last few years is comprehensive area planning. You plan your oil and gas build out in a way that centralizes your facilities, minimizes your roads, ensures that your overall environmental footprint is as small as possible because you're thinking about what's best for the community. And this allows you to set aside places for parks or other business districts and things like that. So I think we need to be thinking in these same kind of systems, bigger system, regional terms around energy to give Democrats, to give planners, to give the problem solvers something to be for, something that is a little bit visionary, a little bit radical in the sense that it's going against the grain of one-off projects right now. And I also think, again, we have to have something that is more compelling than the fear of the climate apocalypse, right? And so you have to have a vision of why this will make people's lives better and answer the question, how are we going to manage our carbon emissions in the process? I also think that it is going to be a winning formulation, even though it's not politically palatable right now, to keep climate, decarbonization, carbon intensity at the center of every energy agenda, even if that is just about best-in-class gas, lower carbon intensity gas. Even if you can't get your project or your operation or your endeavor to net zero, this is coming back. And I think it would be very short-sighted to think that just because the political climate is not friendly to talking about clean, that's going to last more than a couple years. It's just in all of our collective interest to have an ever lower footprint energy system, and carbon intensity is a component that has a lot of legs. So I think that's important. Now, I guess the last thought I have about this is, what will the problem solvers need? And I think this is going to be very unique to the location. So New Jersey has a governor's race going on by now. By the time you get this, it'll be over, so we'll know what happened. But if you're working in a state like New Jersey or Colorado or California, where there's a real external pressure around energy price, cost, reliability, and decarbonization, what do those problem solvers need to be able to articulate a reasonable all of the above approach to move away from this idea of just being anti-oil, anti-gas? I think they're going to need proof points on where the energy transition is falling apart. So I think that's going to still be important to narrate the limits of the myth, the limits of the old vision. I think they're going to need scenario planning. Like, what is the likely demand in the future? Now, of course, scenarios are just that, scenarios, but I think it's going to be really important for a policymaker to imagine, in my state, we're going to need this much natural gas in buildings, this much oil, this much electricity. I think scenario planning is going to be really important to help envision that. And then I think they're going to need this idea that I was just talking about, a framework that has both the upside of innovation and the guardrails of regulation. So they can say, we're doing these things that we once thought we would never do, like build new buildings with natural gas, heat, or something like that. But here's the ways in which it's the best in class. It's the energy of the future. Here's the ways in which we've improved the regulatory expectations, the floor for these things. but in a way that they can still get built and all of our shared enlightened self-interest. All right, I'm going to keep thinking about this. I would love your feedback. I would love your ideas, and I would love your names for what comes after the moment. So the myth of an easy energy transition is unraveling. We find ourselves in this moment that is a nice pause to talk coherently, to think strategically about the energy future. And what is this energy future? Is it, I don't know, the practical transition, the pragmatic transition, the real transition? Do we need to jettison transition? I know a lot of you are fond of addition. I, for one, have never had a lot of luck trying to change the words that environmental advocates have declared. So if you need to go back to the fracking wars and all our attempts to call it hydraulic fracturing, hydraulic stimulation, yeah, it just never worked. I'm a little more for embracing where meeting our stakeholders, particularly the problem solvers, where they are. And if they are talking and thinking about the energy transition as energy transition, then that's where I want to meet them. So how would we describe this transition? Send me your best ideas. Yeah, thank you. That was my episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to Energy Thinks. It's really fun to think about what I'm going to talk to you about, to have you all as my thought partner and what comes next. When you listen to this, I will have spent, I think it's seven or 8 days swimming, 4 hours a day. So I don't even know what's going to happen, but usually I get some crazy ideas. So I'll keep you posted on that. I hope you'll take a moment and rate Energy Thinks wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps others in our industry find us. If you know a problem solver and you would forward this podcast to them so I can hear from them and get their best thinking on my Problem Solvers series and Problem Solvers Thinking, I would love that. For more information about our work at Adamantine, please go to energythinks.com. I hope you'll click on that link to buy my new book, The Myth in the Moment. And while you're there, sign up for my weekly newsletter. Both of these things are true. If you are on Substack and you would like to support my work, thanks for becoming a paid subscriber. It's a wonderful way to allow me to do more writing and thinking outside of our consulting work here at Adamantine. I'd like to thank my colleague, Kayla Chives, for making All Things Energy Thinks podcast possible. Until next time, I'm Tisha Schuller, wishing you and yours happiness, prosperity, and good health.